Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here, at least virtually, among all of you. My name is Theofanis Papamichalis. I'm an assistant teaching professor in economics at Cambridge. And furthermore, I'm a fellow, an official fellow in economics for Murray Edwards. And today, let me share my screen. I hope that you can all see. Let me know if that's not the case. And today I'm planning to split my presentation in two parts. The first part, I'm going to talk a bit about the economics at Cambridge. That includes the interview process. So I'm going to share with you what we look for potential applicants that are interested in studying economics. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the structure of the course. That consists of a 3-year, very, very rigorous course in economics that is basically considered to be one of the finest economics programs in the country. Maybe the finest, but let's keep it honest. And secondly, I'm going to talk about my research, which basically it is based on the interconnection of politics, the macroeconomy, and the stock market. And I'm going to share with you some of the most recent developments in that field. Of course, because this is a public presentation, I'm going to try to keep it simple, and thus I will try to bury the math and focus more on the intuition and why this research is important. Okay. So each year, thousands of students are interested in applying for the economics programs in Cambridge. Usually, each college accepts hundreds of applications, and some of which are accepted for interviews. And I would say that there are two necessary requirements for somebody to succeed in the interview, or if you want to crack the interview process. The first one is we are interested in students that are really good in math. That is basically, when I say maths, I also that also includes some knowledge in probability. So we would like to have students that can critically think on that. And the second necessary condition that somebody should have in order to do well during the interview process is basically to be able to critically think, right? That means that in most cases, he will be provided with a passage, with a text. Usually, in recent years, those texts involve some kind of economic development or political development or any other development from around the world. It could be the Russian-Ukrainian war. It could be some research of Nobel Prize winners. It could be a general interest article. And the student will be given something like 15 minutes to read the text, and then he will be asked some questions. So being able to critically think, it's crucial to perform well in this kind of task. Now, how do we think about critical thinking, right? That's an interesting question. Most academics, and myself included, we believe that critical thinking is something that can be developed. It is a skill that you can improve on. And the best way to do that is to question almost everything, okay? Whatever you see, try to identify the truth behind it. And this will basically greatly help. Economic knowledge is not required for the interview process, although it would be nice to have kind of skill, especially how would you develop that? I would recommend two books. One is from Dasgupta, and the name of the book is called, it's a booklet, it's called A Short Introduction in Economics. And the second book is from Danny Roderick. It's called Economic Rules. And again, this is a book that will introduce you to the world of economics, but not in a very rigorous way. If you go to the website of the economics department, there is also a list of some papers. Those you do not have to read them; they are not compulsory. For example, in microeconomics, the book of variance. It's a big book. It's something that you should start working on after you get the offer, or during the first year in macroeconomics. So that's that with the interview process. The second thing is that we are talking about a 3-year course. The importance of that course and the reason to come here is to become experts in economics, in pure and applied economics. And those 3 years, the first year is called part 1. The second year is part 2A, and the third year is called part 2B. So if we start from the first year, it consists of 5 compulsory courses. Paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, paper 4, and paper 5. Paper 1, it deals with micro, and it basically involves the interaction between firms and households. And the objective of that course is to find out how prices and how quantities are determined within the market. Then students are taking an introductory course in macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is the study of the economy as a whole, both in the short run, in the next 3 to 4 years, and in the long run, in the next decade, so to speak. And then students will also be required to take a course in quantitative methods in economics. It's a great course that will improve your skills in maths, in stats, and in probability. And it's a necessary course for second year econometrics course. The paper 4 basically deals with the interconnection of politics with economics. And then there is a bit of history. There is a bit of history based on what Keynes said, that a great economist should also be a great historian. And in that course, you will cover some aspects from the British economic history, such that the Industrial Revolution or the interwar period. In the second year, things will become a bit more advanced. You will have 3 compulsory courses, not 5. In microeconomics, you will basically start doing game theory, and you will introduce the concept of uncertainty. In second year macroeconomics, you will deal with more advanced concepts such as monetary policy, or labor economics, or international macroeconomics, or some kind of across-period optimizations, the so-called intertemporal optimization. And then in paper 3, it's a great course. It's about introducing you to some important concepts in econometrics. Those important concepts, they deal with correlation. So, for example, you consider the concept of regression in depth, which is a quite weak concept. And we can also, from weaker concepts, we can go to stronger concepts such as causality, that is very important to establish cause and effects between 2 objects or processes. And then based on what you would like to do during the first year, if you like macro, if you like macroeconomics or econometrics, you will specialize by taking an optional paper. And those optional papers, it can be in international trade and economic development. in mathematics and statistics for economists, labor history, and philosophy of economics. Whatever you see in bold, for example, macro quantitative methods, political and social aspects in economics, and some aspects in econometrics, it will be related to my presentation, to my research presentation in a bit. And during the third year, the idea is that you will have two compulsory courses in microeconomics and macro. And those courses will introduce you to very up-to-date policy and important questions. For example, in macro, you will deal with recent challenges from monetary policy. You will try to understand what is the current international macroeconomic landscape and where it is heading to. And also you will deal with the business cycle, the macroeconomy as a whole, and you will do some rigorous growth theory, the determinants behind macroeconomic growth. And then you will need to choose two optional papers out of a big list of papers, to name a few. Some of them include economic theory and analysis. If you are a more pure theory person, political economics, you will deal with political frictions. The course also deals with elections, something that we will see today. It will also deal with institutions. And then you have banking and finance. What is the major financial mechanism behind the stock market or behind the bond market as well? Or you can choose courses in public economics, the economics of developing countries, industry, if you are a more micro person, theory and practice in econometrics 2, which is the advanced course from the second year, the advanced extension from the second year, or if you would like to do some history, you can choose courses such as the World Depression in the interwar years. Finally, something that is very important, and it's also compulsory, by the end of the second year or by the beginning of the third year, students are expected to come up with a novel idea, to come up with a novel research question, and they are given 6 months, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more, in order to come up with an answer to that research idea. Students, during the last 2 years that I've been marking dissertations, I have to say that there are some of them that they are very impressive, even to the highest publishable standards, which shows that the level in these universities is quite high, and we are very proud of that. So that was the first part of my presentation. Let me also tell you that something important, that the first year it's compulsory to pass, but it also counts 0%. It doesn't count towards your final grade. The second year counts 30%, and the final year counts 70%. So the majority of your degree it is based on the third year and how serious you will take that year. That doesn't mean that the first and the second year are not important. In fact, they are very important, and they are very important because they introduce you to some basic concepts, and they are necessary conditions to become a good economist. Some of the graduates they go into research. So some of them, they go to the United States to some of the finest universities to do a PhD. Some of them go to the industry. So basically, you can do everything you like as long as it is correlated or associated with the economics discipline. So that's that about the course. And now let me proceed to the second part of my presentation, which is basically one paper that we started writing with Dean Rio, that he's now a visiting PhD student at Harvard, and Mango Wilson, who is an associate professor in Oxford. And this paper lies in the intersection of microeconomics, political economy, and finance. And let me give you a brief historical background as a motivation. It is logical to assume that politics and governments in particular, they affect the business cycle, they affect the macroeconomy, and they also affect the financial markets. Well, why is that? The intuition behind that is that politics and governments in particular are responsible for setting the rules, right? They set all the regulatory framework that the businesses and most firms they are operating on. And this is very important for their profitability, for their future plan, and for the uncertainty that they face. Now let's become a bit more specific, and we would like to answer which political variables we are talking about, right? The current literature has documented that two political variables are very important for both the macroeconomy and the financial markets, especially the stock markets. And those political variables are first, the US president. So the recent literature says that if the US president is a Democrat, so when Barack Obama or Clinton was in office, the stock market used to do exceptionally well. However, and the real growth was exceptionally well, was going exceptionally well. However, during Republican governments, during governments that, for example, during the Trump administration or Reagan or Bush, the stock market and the economy, they both perform very, very poorly. And the second political variable is basically by examining what happens in the period after the midterm elections, right? In the United States, and we will always be talking about the United States in this presentation, is a country that has election every 4 years, and midterm elections after 2 years after the federal elections. And it seems that there is an empirical pattern, something that can be verified empirically, that during and basically after 6 months after the midterm elections, the stock market is doing exceptionally well, and people can have big profits out of it. So the novelty of this paper is to examine, is to forget about those two variables and see what is happening when we consider the status of governments. So the research question is basically, what is the impact of the status of governments on real growth? And as a secondary question, what is the impact on the stock market? Now, what does it mean, status or type of governments? We consider two main types of governments. The first one is the US government, that is basically a united government. And the second type of government is the US government that is called divided. What is a united government? A united government is a government where the White House, that is the executive branch, is of the same party, of the same origin, of the same color, if you want, with the legislative branch, which comprises of the Senate and the House. So we have like three possible slots, the President, the Senate, and the House. The possible combination that we can have there is 8. And a united government is basically the US government that comprises either of a Democrat president, Democrat House, and Democrat Senate, or a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican White House. Okay, so we have 2 combinations out of 8 that basically are called united governments, and the other 6 we can safely say that they are divided governments. And this is a very interesting historical background of what has happened in the past. The analysis, it starts from 1901, where Theodore Roosevelt was in power, and that was when, with dark red, you can basically see that the government was Republican and Republican united. And then, for example, when we have Theodore Roosevelt back in the 40s, we have a united government that consists of Democrats. But we can see, for example, that Clinton, during those years, during 2 years only, the government under the Clinton administration was united, and then it became divided. And the same happened with Obama and Trump, and Biden managed to keep only the united governments only for 2 years. So we have 2 combinations out of 8, and then it's a usual thing that we do in research. We first see what has already been done. Okay. And the recent research and the relevant research indicates that there are 2 explored regions. The first explored region has to do with the presidential cycle, which was first introduced by Santa Clara and Volkanov in 2002, in 2003. And the idea is that during Democrat presidents, there is much higher growth, real growth. The economy is doing much better than the Republican president. And the same happens with stock market returns. Equity premia, stock market returns, they tend to be much higher. And let me give you a level. If you go historically and invest your money in the US market under a Democrat president, you will get something like 10% per year. And if you do the same with a Republican president, you will get close to 0%. You will not get any returns from your investment at all. So this is the first explored area. And the second explored area is basically that there is a midterm election cycle that we discussed a bit before, is that six months after the midterm elections, that time is associated with much higher equity premium than other times. And now we want to see whether divided governments, it's also a cycle, it's also a political cycle that can drive growth, and to what extent, and it can also drive stock market returns. And this is what we find. We find some striking patterns. One of them is that the government cycle, as we name it, is associated with the fact that stock market performs very well during united governments and very bad during divided governments. So the policy recommendation here would be, if there's going to be a divided government after this election, don't invest in the stock market. And the economic growth also performs exceptionally well during united governments, and exceptionally bad during divided governments. And we believe that the dynamic, it comes from divided Republican governments, and those are governments that are associated with higher amounts of recession, higher periods, longer periods of recession. And recessions are basically times that growth and gross domestic products and other real variables are depressed. And it is also associated with political gridlock, which can also increase uncertainty. And in that case, we can say that they are politically bad because of gridlock or sabotage that we will explain in detail in a bit. And then we also document in this research that there are some other striking patterns, such as most of the bad performance in the stock market of divided Republican governments, they happen in September. So there is a September effect. And in fact, there is one pattern in economics that gave the Nobel Prize in 2013 to Eugene Fama. And this is called the small size effect. So the S&P that you see here in the bottom, it means basically that small stocks, there are theories behind. This theory says that small stocks earn much higher returns in the stock market. They do better than big stocks. So small minus big, it's something that is positive. And we prove that small minus big exists only during united governments, which is something that we consider very interesting. Now, in order to perform an analysis, we need to basically rely on some data, right? It's not a theoretical paper, it's an empirical paper. And that's why we collected monthly stock market returns from CRISP, from the Center of Research for Security Prices. It is a database that has very interesting data, and we collect monthly returns. So we care about the time variation of returns, and those monthly returns are from 1927 until 2020. So in total, imagine that we have something like more or less a bit more actually than 1,000 data points, which we consider they are enough for analysis. And then what we take from CRISP is basically a proxy for the market, and that proxy is the value-weighted excess returns that we can directly download. And what is exactly this? It takes a bit bunch of stocks, let's say 3,000 stocks, and we take the value-weighted average of those stocks in terms of market capitalization. If we do that, we can proxy the market in a relatively good way. And then the second proxy that we get is the equal weighted excess stock market returns, which is basically more or less 3,000 stocks that they are equally weighted. So we just take we take the mean of that, and that means compared to the value weighted returns that we put higher weight in small stocks, in stocks that are associated with stocks with small market capitalization. And then we can also adjust for inflation, and then we can take real returns, real inflation adjusted value weighted excess returns, and inflation adjusted equally weighted returns. That's that with stock market returns. And then we obtain the economic growth data in order to associate politics with the macroeconomy by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. It is a rich database, and we collect data from 1947. And this data is quarterly. And we can also use the database of some prominent economists from the United States, which provided us with data from the beginning of the 20th century, in particular from the first month of 1900s. So this is how we model real growth. And finally, in order to model the united governments, we create a dummy, and the dummy, it's a series of data that consists of zeros and one. We put one in the month that the government is a united government, and we put a zero if the government is a divided government. And from 1927, this is a fairly balanced sample. It means that more or less half of the governments were united, and more or less the other half were divided. So this is what we get. And let me explain you what we see here. We see three bars. The first is the united excess stock market return, which means that on average, those 93 years that we collected we have data. If you go to the stock market and invest your money to the value-weighted portfolio under a united government, on average, you will get something like 10%, a bit more. If you do it for under divided government, you will get much less. You will get something like 1.6, 1.7%. And the total is the total market return. So historically, the stock market has been delivering something like a bit more than 5%, close to 6% per year. As compared to the bonds market that you get 1 or 1.5%. And the reason for that is risk, right? There is higher risk. So we can argue with some theories that you will see during the third year at Cambridge that high aggregate risk is associated with higher returns. And this is an interesting table with the data. On the x-axis, you see the returns of the value-weighted portfolio of the stock market, and then the real return on the second column. On the third column, you see the equally weighted portfolio, the portfolio that has most stock market returns with equal weights. So it basically gives a bigger weight to smaller stocks. And during the last column, you see the equally weighted returns in minus inflation. And then on the y-axis, you see how much you get under a united government. The sample is 556 months, and what return you get under a divided government. You see the numbers that we described before from column 1. So 10.3 under a united, 1.6 under a divided. And for the third column, this is the really interesting, where you put a higher weight to smaller stocks, you get a huge return. You get something like 16.78% per year in your investment. And whatever you see in parentheses, it's called the t-stat. Whenever you see a t-stat greater than 2, it means that the number is statistically significant, different from 0. And that means that the number here, for example, 3.66, it reflects that the 10%, it's a quite big number. It's a quite big investment. It's a quite big return from your investment. And then we repeat the same with presidents, and we find similar results, but a bit different. Now, what about economic growth? What about the macroeconomy? Here we reveal something that is quite striking as well. As you see from this chart, you can see in the x-axis, you see the nature of the president, whether the president is Democratic or Republican. On the x-axis, you see whether the government is united or divided. And this is the interesting pattern that the real growth under a United Democrats government is 5.4%, and this is huge. The T-stat it is much more than 2. It is 4, which means that it is a very significant, a very important, and statistically significant different from zero number. To the contrary, you see that Republican divided governments, they are associated with just 1.91%. It is still significant. It's something positive. On average, during those 36 years that they were in power, they deliver 1.91%. But as a matter of fact, there is a huge difference. There is a difference by more than something like 3.5% difference between the two. And we also find that Republican presidents ruling a united government, they are associated with much higher growth than divided Democratic presidents. So the 3.31 is quite higher than the 2.22. Okay. And the sample is for the last 120 years. We don't consider COVID, so we decided to exclude 2021 and 2022, and the reason for that is basically that COVID can be considered as an outlier, and in economics we don't want to find results that are entirely driven by something. So Great Depression was a huge event. There are other huge events that belong to the right or the left tail of the distribution, which basically we don't want to exclude them. Okay. Again, the sample is fairly balanced. Democrat presidents ruled the country for 56 years, Republican for 66. We have united governments for 70 years, divided governments for 52 years. And we can see that the gap that is between united and divided is basically close to 2.5. And the gap that is from the Democrat minus Republican is basically close to 2%, which is, the difference is also significant. Something that we find, and we believe is interesting, is that the Republican divided governments, the governments that are associated with with lower growth rates, lower real growth rates, they tend to happen during big recessions. So in that graph, the gray areas, and we are talking from 1950s until 2020, the gray shaded areas, they are areas that reflect economic contraction, basically when the economy was not doing very well. And then you can see the 4 different regimes. You see divided Democrat, United Democrat, divided Republican, and United Republican governments. And it's obvious that the divided Republicans, they are associated with periods of higher recession. However, when we when we remove those periods, we see that the united minus divided gap, it still remains. However, we don't observe any Democrat minus Republican gap. That's something interesting. And based on the graph, based on the fact that small cap stocks, as reflected by the equal weighted portfolio, are doing much better, we also document that strategies which basically are comprised of buying small cap stocks and selling big cap stocks can give you very high returns during only united governments. So the size effect, one of the effects that gave the Nobel Prize to Eugene Fama from Chicago, we saw that it performs exceptionally well during united governments, united regimes, and it is very poor, even close to zero, when we consider divided government periods. And in fact, there is some literature that says that the size effect is because of January. January is the month that small cap stocks perform exceptionally well. But even if we remove January from our sample, we find a pretty high small minus big gap. And now it's the time that we need to start thinking why. What is happening here? And the first thing to do is that we will link the government cycle to the presidential cycle. Remember that the presidential cycle is basically the phenomenon that the equity premium, the stock market returns are higher during democratic presidents, and those give something like 10.7% returns. And under Republican is close to nothing. It's 0.9% during a huge period of time, during almost the last 100 years. And the plausible question is that since the president is part of the government, are those two political cycles associated or connected, or there is a correlation behind the two? And the answer is that it is natural to assume that. And a very good starting point would be, what are the explanations that the literature has given about the presidential cycle? So there is a paper by Pastor and Veronesi. It was published recently, and it provides an explanation behind the presidential cycle, or if you want, the presidential puzzle. Why Democrat governments are doing so well. And by asking the questions, do Republicans cause bad economy, or do Democrats cause a good economy? Pastor and Veronesi say no. Why? Well, if you try to consider some association or some correlation between two variables, X and Y, it is highly likely that even if you have a high association, a high correlation, you don't know where the causality comes from. So some might argue that X causes Y, or some might argue that Y causes X. And it's highly likely that there is a third variable that causes both of those two, X and Y. In that case, what Pastor and Veronesi say, and this is really interesting, is the fact that it's not the government that causes a bad economy or a good economy. And it's not basically the government that causes high stock market or low stock market returns. And it's the other way around. That's what they suggest. They say that in periods that the risk, the attitude towards risk is low, a period that investors don't want to invest in the stock market, they tend to vote for Democrat presidents. And in periods that the risk aversion is very low, so the attitude towards risk is actually quite high, US citizens or US investors tend to vote for Republicans. This is what they find in their paper. They find the presidential premium, that Democrats perform much better in the stock market than Republicans. And this is basically the intuition that they give, okay? So what they say is that in periods, and we really need to start from the bottom left, in periods of very, very high risk aversion, in periods that investors don't want to invest, they tend to vote for Democrats. And in that case, there is a faster growth. Why? Because there is only the skilled labor that goes for entrepreneurial jobs, jobs that actually can expand the economy. the rest, they do state jobs. They do backup jobs that they help these entrepreneurial jobs in order to perform better. So due to higher productivity, we should also expect that during Democrat governments to have faster growth. Faster growth, it leads eventually to risk aversion being low. That means that people want to invest more, they take more risk, they love more risk. And as a result, they vote for Republicans, which results into slow growth. And this is basically a cycle which is called the presidential cycle. It's what Pastore and Veronesi propose for the solution of the presidential puzzle. Now, the question that, the interesting question that arises here is whether the government cycle and the presidential cycle are basically interconnected, or the government cycle, it can come up from as a direct consequence of the presidential puzzle. And we claim that the answer is no. And the easiest way to see that is that we also find empirically that Republican governments that are united, they do exceptionally well. So that part of the circle over here, the risk aversion thing, it breaks. So it could also mean that high risk aversion is associated with Republican governments that are united. So here we find a contradiction behind the logic of Pastore and Veronesi. And what we find, if we do this breakdown, if we divide everything in United Democrats, United Republicans, divided Democrats, and divided Republicans, we find that only divided Democrats underperform. Only periods of a Republican president, a Republican White House with a divided Congress is basically the one combination that is doing exceptionally bad. So if Trump gets reelected and if Trump fails to basically form a united government, that theory, that empirical facts, it basically says that it will not be a good time to invest money in the stock market. So that's basically the first empirical fact from the literature. There is a second cycle. It's called the midterm cycle, and it was discovered recently by Chan and Mars. And basically, what those two guys say is that during the post-midterm election months, so we are talking about midterm elections which happen in November 2 years after the federal elections. And from that time until six months after, the stock market gets something like 15.4% per year of a return. And any other month during the last 100 years, it is associated only with 3% per year. And the economic intuition is that they suggest is that basically that after midterms, you have a huge amount of resolution of uncertainty. So uncertainty goes down. Why? Because people and investors know who's going to lead, who's going to be in charge, and they also know their agendas. Okay, so they don't have to worry about that. They internalize that into their decisions, and that can actually be translated to very low future discount rates, which reflects into higher prices in the market and higher returns. Now, this is a graph about what is happening. We see the fourth year of the election period. Year one it's with the dotted lines here. Year 2 is where you have huge biannual changes in equity prices. So compared to the last year, the increase in the stock market is tremendous. It's very high. And this is where it comes from, where the premium it comes from. And so based on those two cycles that the literature has found, the next question that we answered is basically whether this Chan and Marsh result, it leads the government cycle result in the market that we found before. So the wise thing to do is basically to remove those months, 6 months after the midterm elections, the months that are somewhere here, and to see whether the premium still exists. The government premium still exists, okay? And we see that not only it exists, but it becomes stronger. So by removing those months, we see that the difference between united and divided governments, it goes from 8.7% to 11.64%, and it's a huge number and statistically significant based on the T-stat in the parentheses. Also, in the third column, for small cap stocks, we see that the equal weighted portfolio, it is associated with 20% of excess return, which is also quite impressive. And this is very robust to the period that excludes the Second World War, and it still accounts for something like 10%. Okay. Now, what are the possible explanations about the government cycle? And what we have found and what the literature finds is that growth can be affected by political sabotage. So during divided governments, it's harder to pass a bill through the Congress that needs a general consensus in order for that to happen. So we argue that in times of need, in times of a recession, where the need to pass a law that will stimulate the economy is greater, that probability decreases, okay? And this can harm the macroeconomy. Also, there is some evidence from the literature that shows that divided governments are associated with decreased investments in the United States. And the idea behind this can be because of political conflict, and which deteriorates the trust of investors. Now, when it comes to the stock market, the idea is simple, is much more simple. Political gridlock can lead to political uncertainty. Political uncertainty can increase the future discount rates, which can lower prices, and as a result, it can lower returns. Now, before I close this presentation, I will talk about something interesting. Of course, we don't expect the stock market returns to be the same during each month. And the literature has documented that there is some time variation. There are months that they are associated with high returns, and there are months that they are associated with low returns. One of those months that we see very, very low returns is basically September and April, okay? So the study that we do here is that we divide our sample of stock market returns into two groups. The one that belongs to divided Republican governments, to the governments that don't do very well, and the other that consists of the rest, okay? The other three regimes that are different. And this is what we find. This is something, again, something very interesting. We find that the September effect, as it is documented by the literature, it's attributable only to divided Republicans, which you can see with the red color over here. And then there is no September effect when it comes to any other regimes. So there's the effect is concentrated literally in those months. There are some other results that we have found, and something that is missing here, and we are working on it, is basically, and it can serve as a future direction. It is basically, what about international evidence? What about other countries? We talked only about the United States, but is it the same for other countries? Do countries that have united governments are associated with higher growth, smaller growth, higher stock market returns, smaller stock market returns? It's something that we need to investigate. And secondly, we need a model. So far, we have done some empirical analysis. The empirical analysis is promising, but in order to understand the dynamics behind that results, we need to come up with a proper theory. And this is something that also needs to be done. So far, and let me conclude with this, we introduced the so-called government cycle. It's a cycle where under united governments we see higher stock market returns and higher US economic growth than divided governments. And of course, it is related, but it is not the same with the presidential and the midterm election cycles. And the reason for that is that for presidents, we also saw that Republican presidents that rule, that control a unified government, they are also associated with exceptionally high returns and in fact, higher growth. So that was it. Thank you so much for listening, and it would be a pleasure to listen to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Fanis. That was absolutely brilliant. We've had some really, really interesting questions as well, people getting really into your talk. We had a few questions about what significance test you used.
So yes, the idea is that we used a very, very simple t-test. What does that mean? It means it's a test that tests whether a number, an estimate that we find is statistically significant, different, or indifferent from zero. And it's the simplest test that somebody can use, and students usually do it from the first year when they study the quantitative methods in economics, paper 3 during the first year. This is the time that they learn about that. I'm pretty sure that some of the students that are interested in studying here, they have done it in the past. They have done statistics, but since this is not something that is compulsory for entrance, I would just say that it's a very simple t-stat that checks whether, statistically speaking, a number is close to zero or not. If there is a number which looks different than zero, if let's say we have 5%, somebody would say that this is different from zero. But as a matter of fact, if you have a random variable and you want to estimate its mean or something else, a different statistic, it could be the case that noise and randomness gives that 5%. So from that perspective, we don't accept that this is different from zero. And a t-stat that is greater than 1.96, it's significant. We say that it's significant at the 5% level. which is acceptable by the academic community, that it's not due to randomness. There is something else behind it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Oh, we've got so many questions pouring in. People have really, really engaged with this talk. I don't think we're going to have time to get into too many of these in detail, but I will ask, we've got a question, what are future discount rates? Could you define that for us, please?
Yes, so future discount rates can be viewed as, let's suppose that there is uncertainty, right? It means that the interest rate that you're going to get from that uncertainty is going to be higher. Usually, think it in a more simple way. If you go to the bank and ask for a loan during good periods, and if the bank believes that you will not default, they will give you a very good rate in your loan. They will give you like 2 or 3%. Now, if there is uncertainty and there is the possibility of default, the bank will give you a higher rate, which is called the risk premium. It's a risk premium in order to protect itself from your default. So higher uncertainty is associated with higher, let's say, interest rates in the future. And in economics, when we want to price something, we do it by considering the cash flow in the future. But since the future is not compatible with the present, the money tends to lose its value. We need to discount it back by the corresponding interest rate. And since this is something that comes in the denominator, smaller discount rates, they are associated with higher prices now, and vice versa.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to have to call an end to the talk there just because of timing. But Fanis, we've got some students with some really, really specific questions about your research, where you think it's leading, why you're inspired to do it. So if anyone who's got a very specific question like that wants to send it over to the outreach email, we will pass it on to Fanis, who will be very happy to send you a response.
Great. You can also find my email online. Just send me an email and we can take it on a one-to-one basis.
That would be brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, so all that remains to say is thank you for coming to this economics webinar hosted by Murray Edwards College. Once again, if you want to find out more about Murray Edwards or come to Cambridge, please do visit us on our open days on the 4th and 5th of July. We'd love to see you. It would be great to meet some of you. Thank you, Fanis, so much for giving this lecture. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. And yeah, thanks a lot.